So 23 days. That's how long the 2025 federal government shutdown has been going on now. Um, the big question for you, I think, is did the funding process just collapse, or did the executive branch actually use this gridlock, well, deliberately, as a lever to restructure the government?
It seems pretty clear, looking at the sources we've gathered, everything from budget rescissions to actual mass layoffs, that this is, well, it's way beyond just a standard temporary funding dispute.
Right.
This deep dive really has to synthesize those core conflicts, the massive economic strain, and the political strategy that seems to be underpinning what's now the second longest shutdown in U.S. history.
And that's our mission today, really.
Hmm.
To synthesize the specifics of this shutdown, which kicked off back on October 1st, focusing on the administration's strategy, basically pursuing that long-sought fiscal pruning right in the middle of a complete political deadlock.
Yeah, and the news hook here is all about leverage, isn't it? The deadlock, it seems to stem from Democrats really digging in their heels, demanding the extension of those, frankly, costly Affordable Care Act subsidies.
ACA subsidies, yeah.
And at the same time, opposing the administration's push for what they call fiscal responsibility, using tools like executive rescissions and, crucially, permanent workforce reductions. I mean, the shutdown is causing real disruption. We're seeing flight delays, huge funding uncertainty for, 42 million SNFP recipients?
That's right, 42 million. And Republicans, led by House Speaker Johnson, they've been pretty consistent on this. Democrats need to stop using these essential programs as bargaining chips and just pass a clean funding bill. So we almost have to look at this moment not just as a negotiation failure, but maybe as a strategic opening to tackle the sheer size of the federal government.
Okay, so let's start with that core conflict you mentioned, the battle over entitlements. The shutdown itself, it was triggered by these partisan disagreements over federal spending levels, specifically the Democrats insisting on extending those enhanced ACA subsidies that are actually set to expire.
And the price tag for letting them expire isn't small for people affected. If those subsidies do disappear, the average subsidized household, their annual out-of-pocket premium, well, it's estimated to more than double. It could jump from around $888 to over $1,900 starting in 2026. So you can see how that potential spike became the Democrats' main point of leverage.
Exactly. So when House Speaker Johnson put out a spending bill without those subsidies, it was clearly a calculated move. It basically dared the Democrats choose between fiscal pruning or blocking all government funding just to protect that healthcare expansion.
And the Democratic response wasn't just a no.
No, not at all. Their counteroffer, it wasn't just about keeping the subsidies. They were looking to increase health spending by, well, a massive $1 trillion.
Wow, $1 trillion. Okay, so if they couldn't get cuts through legislation, what other tools did the administration have? And that brings us to this presidential rescission authority, right? A power that hadn't really been used much since, the Clinton era?
That's right. And what's really interesting here is how reviving this authority, channeled through that new Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, they call it.
DOGE, yeah.
It essentially allowed the executive branch to just unilaterally make cuts to funds Congress had already allocated. That's a pretty profound shift in the usual power dynamic.
And it worked, didn't it? The Rescissions Act of 2025. It used this power to pull back, was it $9 billion?
$9 billion, yeah. Funds that were originally earmarked for foreign aid and public broadcasting.
And the OMB director, Russell Vought, he was pretty upfront about the goal, wasn't he? Saying the appropriations process has to be less bipartisan.
Exactly. That statement, it's more than just wanting to cut spending. It really signals an intent to, bypass those traditional, often expensive bipartisan spending agreements altogether.
So with that kind of refusal to compromise on spending,
Right.
it meant the Republican funding plan, even though it passed the House on September 19th,
Right.
it just failed in the Senate. It got 44 votes for, 48 against. Couldn't clear that 60-vote filibuster hurdle.
That threshold is the key legislative roadblock.
Absolutely. And knowing it was never likely to get 60 votes kind of underscores that the House vote might have been more about, political positioning, setting things up to blame Senate Democrats for the inevitable funding lapse.
And that breakdown, that lapse, it provided the perfect platform, if you will, for the administration to start executing these long-plan structural changes. Which brings us neatly to the idea of this shutdown as an opportunity for reform, specifically through permanent layoffs.
The scale of the disruption is just huge when you look at the numbers. Roughly 900,000 federal employees furloughed, over 1 million working without pay. But, Congress members, they keep getting paid their guaranteed $173,000 salary because of the law from 1983. It really highlights how insulated elected officials are from the hardship they arguably created.
But the administration's focus, it quickly went beyond just temporary furloughs. They moved almost immediately to execute permanent reduction in force plans, RIFs.
Mass layoffs.
Mass layoffs. President Trump even publicly embraced it, didn't he? He said he was in favor of mass layoffs, noting things like, we'd be laying off a lot of people that are going to be very affected. They're going to be Democrats, and we can get rid of a lot of things that we didn't want.
And these weren't just abstract threats. By October 10th, the sources say over 4,100 federal workers had actually received layoff notices, permanent layoffs.
Yeah, the Department of the Treasury saw the biggest hit, about 1,446 positions gone. Then around 1,100 at HHS, mostly hitting the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control.
Right, the CDC. And even smaller agencies like the National Council on the Humanities apparently saw its staff cut down to just 4 people.
These are lasting structural changes to the federal workforce being pushed through while Congress is essentially gridlocked. And all this is happening while the estimated economic cost of the shutdown keeps ticking up about $15 billion for each week it drags on.
And crucially, key economic data stopped flowing. The Department of Labor, Commerce. They suspended releases from the BLS, the Census Bureau, which means, policymakers like the Fed, they were basically flying blind.
Right. Which takes us to how the shutdown itself became, well, an operational political tool. The administration actively used the funding gap to halt billions in already approved public transport funding, specifically $20 billion earmarked for big projects in New York City and Chicago.
And the reason they gave for delaying those projects?
Well, the official line was pretty pointed. They stated the review was stalled because of, and this is a quote, radical Democrats' reckless decision to hold the federal government hostage to give illegal immigrants benefits.
Wow. Okay, that certainly frames it as strategically weaponizing the shutdown to hit spending in blue states they viewed as, well, fiscally irresponsible.
Definitely demonstrates that strategy.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit to the immediate impact on some massive social programs now facing that funding cliff. Starting with SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program.
Right, food stamps. This program serves over 41 million people. That's about 1 in 8 Americans. And it's what's called an appropriated entitlement.
Appropriated entitlement. That term's important, isn't it?
Very important. It means basically the program itself is legally guaranteed. People are entitled to it if they qualify, but Congress still has to approve the money for it each year. So while October benefits went out okay.
Right before the shutdown.
Exactly. But then 25 states, big ones like California and New Jersey included, they announced they wouldn't be issuing SNAP benefits for November. That, understandably, caused immediate panic for millions.
And then the fiscal debate started almost immediately. The Agriculture Secretary, Brooke Rollins, claimed they couldn't distribute funds without Congress open.
Oh, that claim was disputed, wasn't it? Nonpartisan groups argued the law actually requires the USDA to use its contingency reserves. They apparently have about $5 billion set aside.
$5 billion? How much does that cover?
Well, it's estimated to cover about 60% of 1 month's benefits, so the argument was they should use that and prorate benefits if necessary, not just halt payments completely.
Okay. And this crisis, of course, it amplified the existing policy critiques, particularly from a conservative standpoint.
Oh, absolutely. Critics jumped on it, arguing SNAP has grown way beyond its original purpose, and that it's often used for, well, what they call luxury items, things like soda, candy. Items, they argue, encourage poor planning or unhealthy choices.
We even saw RFK Jr. weighing in, suggesting SNAP should only cover fresh, unprocessed food, citing concerns about obesity rates among recipients and potential program abuse.
Right. Now contrast that with WIC, the Women, Infants, and Children program. That one's a discretionary program, meaning no guaranteed funding year to year.
So it faced an even more immediate crisis.
Exactly. Instant crisis. But here, the administration found what they termed a creative solution. On October 7th, the White House directed the USDA to use $300 million in, get this, unused tariff revenue to keep WIC funded through the end of October.
Tariff revenue. Okay.
Yeah. And the messaging around it was very clear. The White House statement said, the Trump White House will not allow impoverished mothers and their babies to go hungry because of the Democrats' political games.
So it highlights that political calculation provide very targeted relief for arguably the most vulnerable group, WIC recipients, while still keeping the pressure on for broader entitlement reform, like with SNMP.
Precisely. And we can't forget the military impact either. Active duty personnel, even though a 2019 law guarantees eventual back pay,
They weren't paid on time.
they weren't paid immediately, no.
Yeah.
And that created instant financial hardship for many families. There was a report from a food pantry near a base in Kansas. They saw a 300% spike in traffic from military families needing help.
300%. That really tells a story about the immediate stress on the ground.
It really does. And again, to get around the congressional deadlock, President Trump directed $8 billion this time from unobligated R&D funds, money already approved but not yet assigned. He directed that to pay service members, citing, the urgency of supporting the troops during the shutdown.
Okay, let's talk about the immediate operational fallout beyond those specific programs. The travel sector seems to be feeling intense pain. The White House even issued warnings about a potential holiday travel meltdown if this gridlock continued.
Yeah, the pressure points there are pretty obvious. You've got about 63,000 essential personnel, TSA officers, air traffic controllers, forced to work without pay.
And the FAA was already short-staffed before this?
Exactly. There were already about 3,500 air traffic controllers below their target staffing levels. So forcing the existing controllers, who were already stretched thin, to work for free. Well, predictably, it led to significant flight delays starting pretty early in October, especially at major hubs like Chicago and Newark.
And while all those essential workers were dealing with that uncertainty, a memo surfaced from the Office of Management and Budget, the OMB, that seemed to make things even worse.
Yeah, that draft memo caused quite a stir. It apparently questioned whether furloughed federal workers are actually legally entitled to back pay unless Congress specifically writes it into the final funding bill.
But wait, didn't the 2019 law guarantee back pay after the last big shutdown?
It did. So this memo seemed to directly contradict that law, adding just massive uncertainty for families already dipping into savings, just trying to cover basic bills.
So, okay, if we try to connect all these dots, what we're seeing is a shutdown that's really become a fundamental clash over the size, the scope, maybe even the legitimacy of federal power.
I think that's right. The president seems to have seized this moment using executive tools like rescission and these mass layoffs to push for long-sought government efficiency and permanent cuts.
While the political fight in Congress boils down almost entirely to forcing the extension of billions in healthcare subsidies.
Right. It's a really high-stakes strategy. You have the executive branch seemingly using the legislative gridlock itself as a tool to achieve structural reforms that Congress, mainly because of that 60-vote Senate threshold, was either unwilling or unable to pass on its own.
The leverage seems absolute. Democrats demanding entitlement expansion, the administration demanding fiscal responsibility.
And seemingly accepting the temporary operational pain, the flight delays, the program uncertainty as the necessary price for achieving permanent structural change in government.
So, given this intense debate over SNAP, now serving 1 in 8 Americans, and those concerns we talked about from the sources, program abuse, impact on public health, maybe the final question for you to think about is this. Should Congress use this moment, this crisis, to fundamentally restructure federal food aid? Maybe tie all benefits strictly to healthy, unprocessed staples? That's a critical question to consider as this deep dive concludes.